Hi, Joe Cerrone with our weekly Zoom meeting for CAD 117050. This week we're going to cover Module 3. Module 3 is traditional drafting tools, and we kind of work off of our module from last week doing multi-view drawing. There's one drawing assignment that's to complete this drawing. It's a metric drawing, so you'll want to use a metric title block for that. And you're going to want to be able to draw the front, top, and right side view, and then create a model of that part. You can download the author's title blocks, or you can use the metric title block that we have in D2L. And then there's 3 additional drawings. Those are bonus, but they're really pretty fun. Hope you will work on those. If we go to the content section, here's where the title block is that I would use. I would use this metric B-size title block, and you can just download it and then start working on the drawing like I have here. I did make a suggestion, and the suggestion was to go into the dimension style and to adjust the dim scale so that the numbers show up. You'll find they'll come out really small. And if you adjust it to 24, technically 24.7 would be a conversion factor. And so as we look at that, and I might be wrong with that number as I'm speaking, but if I am, just send me an email and I'll fix it. So you do have to increase the scale or the dim scale so that the letters are readable. But other than that, the drawing is really very straightforward, as are some of the other ones. If we look at them, what I want you to do is to draw the front, right, top view, and then to annotate those with the correct hidden and center lines. Be sure to put your name on the title block. There are videos that show you how to do that. And so if we come back here to D2L, we go to Module 3, you have a video right here on how to create the 2-dimensional drawing and how to do the 3-dimensional drawing. And then there's some additional drawings if you want to do, oops, I guess that one's not it. But they're in the textbook and they're in the main splash page. There's only one drawing required, and that's the one that I just showed you. It's also right here in the textbook for this traditional drafting project right over here. All right, so that's the assignment. You have 2 weeks to do that. And then when we look at the lecture, we're scheduled to cover the lecture for chapter 3. And I talked a little bit before I started this recording about the content in chapter 3 in Technical Drawing 101 textbook. And it's really just very traditional. It talks about drafting tools and how to use a drafting machine and how to use templates and things like that. And we really don't do that so much anymore. You do want to know how to read drafting scale. And so it does go through and talk to you about that. But I'm going to talk about 3D modeling in the other textbook now while I'm doing the recording. And so let's do that. Let's take a look at viewing and displaying 3D models. When we talk about viewing 3D models and we look at some of these different commands, they have a number of different ways to change your viewing. And AutoCAD likes to sell Autodesk products, so they always come out with something neat as far as how to do things and look at them. Some of them I use, some of them I do not use. And so navigation, as we look at these different navigational bars, you have the view cube, and then you have this other, it's kind of like a view bar. They have things called steering wheels. I really don't use those. It's just kind of awkward. I think SolidWorks uses them also. The orbit tool is great. If I go into this drawing right here of a kitchen and I want to use the orbit tool, when I'm not sure where they are, I just type in the commands. And so I'll just say orbit. And if we say orbit, then when you click on the mouse, you can go through and you can kind of Xbox your way through the model. And remember, when we're drawing in 3D, what we're really drawing is in the X and Y axis, and then we manipulate the Z. And you can actually see my X and Y axis is pointed in this direction. because I would be drawing on the side. And so if I went into a UCS, I'm going to just bail out of this. UCS is the key, user coordinate system. And so if I put a user coordinate system where origin, x-axis, and then y-axis is aligned with this wall, whatever I drew would be on that wall. And so if I drew a cylinder, it would be drawn, and I can Osnap to something here. Oops. So let's go with, do that again. And for some reason, it's kind of, somehow I'm a little deeper back on that than I thought I was. But my XY plane should be set on there. I'm not sure why I'm farther away, but you can see it's in the proper orientation. And we'll come back to that and see what's going on with why it's a little bit farther back. It's probably something silly, but as we go through and we start looking at these different ways to view things, we have the view cube, and you can go through and you can manipulate the view cube. So if I come back here to our part, here's my view cube, and if I grab it, I'm terrible with it. You can kind of start to crank this around. You can go back to the home, and it should go back to what it was. Not sure why it changed my display and color like that, but apparently that's what it does. If I go to the top view, that's going to be the top view for the current UCS orientation. And this is kind of why I don't use it. If I come back and I go old school under the view and I go to 3D views, this is what I was used to. I was using these view presets. I kind of grew up on these. And this is really excellent if you understand it. This would be looking down from the top. This would be 0, 90, 180, and 270. And then this would be an elevation. And so this would be looking at it straight from, let's say, sea level, and then 30 degrees above sea level. And so you could set these things up for like 45 and 30 and okay it. And that would be an isometric view. That's how we used to set the isometric views. And then somebody at Autodesk said, hey, why don't we just go and just set those for them with view presets? And so you can go into 3D views, and then these are preset views. And so top view, bottom, left, right, isometric, etc. All right, let's continue so my video doesn't get too long. So they manipulate and show you how to look around at these different three-dimensional parts, talk to you about perspectives. There's not a big difference, parallel versus perspective. It's just a few degrees, but if you go through some of these old drafting textbooks, they are quite detailed as far as how to create those. And here's how to work your way around the view cube. Again, once you learn how to orbit, you don't necessarily need to know how to do any of those. It's like a mouse with a wheel on it in the center. When the wheels came out on the mouses, a lot of things got a lot easier. So here's the user coordinate system. And as we talk about the UCS, WCS is the default, and it means world coordinate system, which is the Earth. We're on the Earth, and so north is up, south is down. And that's kind of how they orientate themselves when we start working with different views. And so here's the view cube settings. You can go through and set up these different settings. Like I say, I really don't do a lot of work with it. Most of the time I can accomplish everything with orbit. Continuous orbit is pretty fun when you get down to it. If you have somebody like comes through the shop and they want a tour, we typically have people that would come in. You can go through and you can continuously orbit a part by going to the orbit command. And while you're in the orbit command, you can right mouse click, and then you can enable the continuous orbit mode. And then what it'll do is it will spin based on how you let it go. So you just have to kind of click it and move it. And then you can just leave it on your screen like a screensaver. You can continuously orbit, or you just go through and start going through our kitchen here like we were, and then escape. All right, let's go back to our isometric view, back to our curriculum. Steering wheels, again, another way to do the same thing. So I really don't go and use steering wheels. You're welcome to go through and use them. You may need to set the center of the orbit of the zoom tool, and this shows you how to do that. Just a lot of different ways to manipulate the visual display here. More on the steering wheels, navigation bars. Al is quite good with creating videos. You can actually create walkthroughs and scenes. And when he's back on board, I'll have him go through and demonstrate how to do that. And then I have never used these hide objects. This is something Autodesk has added. And so you can now isolate and hide different objects. In AutoCAD, you just put them on a layer and turn it off. That was typically the way that everybody would work with those things. And so as we look at these different viewing commands, they're just on how to look at objects differently. And so if I come back here, if I get to the good stuff, essentially you have these different views, conceptual. A nice view is this sketchy view. I kind of like it. It looks very pencil-y. You know, if you want something to look kind of like pencil. If I want to go back and make my background screen white, I think I can get it to work by going here. It keeps doing this to me. So I'm not sure where this layout is when it does that. It's kind of glitchy. Maybe it's this. I don't know. I'm not going to mess with it. But you should be able to change it to a different perspective. It just gets me distracted by going through too many different things. Sketchy is really cool. Wireframe is just 2D. X-ray. And it does have the ability to go through and to make things look very realistic. And so you can render things out and have materials, shiny things. But Autodesk really kind of went with other software. Rather than upgrading AutoCAD, which is a traditional two-dimensional tool, they came out with Inventor, which is like SolidWorks. And so Revit is also like that. So they came out with new modeling engines instead of the same ones. And so as we go through, I've got somebody looking for me. I'll come back to it. Back to our information. That's about it for the 3D. Be able to work with these different viewing commands. And essentially, as we start to work with our AutoCAD in 3D, we're going to start to work with changing the user coordinate system and being able to change that. So when you take an object like this and we're going to model it, if I come back here to the Home tab, turn off your dimension layer, and then typically what I'll do is I'll model things off of the best shape. So if I'm going to model something like this, what I would do is I would copy this bottom shape here off to the side. And then I would, not going to need these, at least I don't think I will. I would create a region out of it. Remember, they have to be closed poly shapes. By making a region out of that, it ensures that, because remember, if it's a single line and we extrude it, it's a surface and not a solid. And then if I come back here and I look at the drawing, I'm going to have to turn on my dimensions to see the sizes. But the size of this is going to be 3 inches. And so what I would do is I would extrude it. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll switch over to a 3D workspace. And then I can use Extrude. And I can select that model. And I can say 3 inches. And then I can hit escape. And I can rotate it. Put it in the right perspective. You want these numbers to be like 90-degree angles. And so as it's kind of going here, I'm going to say 90 to make sure that it's flat. In other words, that it stays within my perspective. And then what I would do is I would go over here and I would press pull this 2.25. And so if I again go to my layers and I turn off the dimension layer, and then I would say, I'm going to turn off the center line layer. I would say press pull. Sometimes it fails. Hover, acquire the geometry. Was it 2.5? Probably. If I'm not right, let's see here. .25. So if I'm not right, I can click on it and then I can go grab it and I can bring it back down. 2.25. And then essentially this is kind of like modeling, like working with Lego. You can kind of start to bring these out and over. And so I'm going to bring this 90 and then I'm going to go grab the other axes and I'll go twist that around 90. And then when you move it, you're going to want to use 3D Osnaps. And so if you go into the Osnap settings, you can turn on the 3D Osnaps. And so I want midpoint on an edge because I want to grab it from a midpoint. And then I can move that from the midpoint there. And it didn't get the midpoint on an edge. It just grabbed a regular midpoint, which is fine. Same with this one. That's just a regular 2D midpoint. It almost worked. It looks to me like perhaps I did not model this the right thickness. As we go through and we look at it, it's also a little bit too embedded in there. So let's try moving it again. Move. And so we'll say base point here to, whoops, let's move this one from here to here. Yeah, everything fits. Orbit. Now I'm getting better with it. And then if I move it, click on it. Sometimes it's easier to move it with the visual style in 2D wireframe. You can kind of see it. And then to put the holes in, what you can do is you can just work on the top. And so if I go back here to conceptual, so here's my top view of it. What I could do, I'm just going to do a shortcut. I'll show you. I like to use different colors. And so if I come over here and I change this to, let's just go with purple and do the same, even though it's on a hidden line, we'll make it work. We'll say escape. I can copy them. And so if I say copy, and I'll copy it from this point right, let's do the one in the front, right here, to this point right here, it would lay those parts out on the top of it. Now, if it didn't, you could use a 3-point UCS, and you could put a UCS right here on the top. And Al's real good with dynamic UCS. We'll talk about that too. But essentially, I could also draw in the XY plane. One thing you can't do is you can't offset a solid line. So if I say color, here's a shortcut, color. I like AutoCAD because you don't have to spell things right. I was never good at it. And I go with purple. What you do is you draw a line on the edge. And then if I track this out, there we go. then I can go and offset it however much this mount was supposed to be. And so it looks like it's half of 3 inches, so 1.5. So as you work with these, you have to understand what can be offset, what two-dimensional geometries work and what doesn't. And so I could offset that 1.5, 1.5. And then I would offset it the other way, which would be 1 inch. And I'd have to do the same thing. I'd have to draw a line right here and just track it like that. I like to draw them a little farther because they're just construction lines, so that they, when they're line on top of line, selecting one over the other can be hard. Offset 1 inch. And maybe it's 0.75. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's 0.75. And so that's how you'll locate, the positioning. And then I'm going to get rid of it because I don't really need it. And then once you have done that, you can press pull or you can extrude. And so when I look at that, press pull is everybody's favorite because it's faster. If I can get it to work, I'll go to a conceptual. I'll say press pull, hover, acquire, pull it or press it, and it will combine the Boolean operations of boundary and subtract. And if I orbit this, shift middle mouse wheel, and then if I press pull that, if it goes through an object, it subtracts it. If it goes above an object, it adds it. So we want to go through the object like that. Everything else is pretty standard through basic extrusions. And so that would complete how we would model this, put it onto a title block. And then what I recommend is put the two-dimensional geometry there and then put a viewport here for the 3D. Control R will get you into that view. Sometimes looks like I'm having some graphic issues. Not sure why, but there we go. Be sure to put your name on the title block, and that completes a brief rundown on our module 3. I'm going to end the recording and open things up for questions.